rose to the highest levels of our government and Israel's.
Well, you alluded to how I start one of the chapters about Leslie Wexner. There's 2 chapters pretty much devoted to him in the book. But, I think most people think of him as a retail mogul. And, I mean, yeah, he certainly is that. But, there's a lot more to Leslie Wexner. And I think he's one of those billionaires who generally, historically, has been really publicity shy. He doesn't want stories about him out there. I mean, he's a pretty private guy, and, when you start seeing the type of, publicity profiles he's done in the past, I think you realize when he started doing less of them because he says really insane stuff. But he also has, there's a really dark underbelly to this guy, and when you consider that he's Jeffrey Epstein's, main benefactor, for an extensive part of this period, it's pretty unsettling. And you start to look at the limited clothing company that he runs and all this. You have the situation that you alluded to a second ago, where Leslie Wexner in 1985 tells New York Magazine, and it's woven throughout the story, and I would recommend people go and read the article yourself because it sounds really fantastical. Like, there's no way they would put that out, but it's there. And Leslie Wexner is basically like, so I have this thing called a book, and I have 2 personalities and all this stuff in it. I mean, it's really nuts. So the book and DYB UK, you look it up in Jewish encyclopedias and secular encyclopedias, and across the board, it is the Yiddish term for demonic possession. So the guy is, it depends on how you feel like. He's either mentally ill and has a split personality disorder, or if you believe in that sort of stuff, he really thinks he is or is proud of it, at least. And why was made in the 80s, the same period when he's basically claiming to be demon possessed in the Jewish faith, and he starts focusing first on training leaders for the North American Jewish community, and then subsequently in the late 80s starts focusing on training leaders for the Israeli government. And so you have a guy that, is saying he's possessed by a demonic force, training leaders that are going to be put in prominent positions of power in the Jewish community, both in the United States or in North America, and then in Israel. I mean, that's pretty insane. It's sort of like someone funding, Catholic clergy with a fast track to the Vatican. And he's telling New York Magazine he's possessed by the devil. I mean, it's kind of like, why has no one complained about this? It kind of makes you wonder. But and basically funds this center. Most of its funding comes from him, or it comes from people that are also in the Epstein story, like Glenn Dubin and Leon Black, some of the big fancy people. People with a lot of money in Epstein's circle also end up on the board of the CPL. Part of the Wexner Foundation's origins are in an organization that pops up a couple times in the book called B'nai B'rith, which is also the parent organization of the Anti-Defamation League. And back in the New York Times archives, you can find articles about B'nai B'rith, and they basically describe themselves as Jewish Freemasons. It's a secret society. So there's some intrigue there, perhaps, right? But beyond that, around the early 90s and stuff, Wexner and also Epstein get really involved in Harvard University, and so they're programmed to train to have Israel, I think that's called Wexner Israel Fellows or something like that. They start getting involved at the Harvard Kennedy School, and then Wexner basically funds into existence the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard, and David Gergen is put in charge of that, known as his lawyer, and he took on Robert Keith Gray as a PR executive. And both of those guys, as I note very extensively in the book, have very deep ties to intelligence, sex blackmail operations. And in Robert Keith Gray's case, U.S. Congress extensively, resulting in the much covered up page boy scandal of the early 80s. And I mean, I don't know if you want me to pause.
Listening, but which is really just like, you know, another word for MK Ultra, which, by the way, never stopped. So, just as an aside, in my 2-volume series, Merchant of Death, Leslie Wexner, I use the example of Joan Crawford, who was perhaps the first fashion influencer long before anybody ever heard about the Kardashians or any of the other so-called influencers. And she was used in order to sell mass-produced dresses, which was a new thing at the time when this happened. Now, I go into it because, of course, it leads into why Wexner was selected to be an arm of the intelligence apparatus of the United States. And, of course, we know that it included Israel as
Wexner, and what is his relationship to Epstein? And before you begin, because I want people to keep this in mind as they're listening, as far as I know, and I think this is correct, Wexner, who I believe is still alive, has never been interviewed by the Department of Justice. So just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, that's correct as far as I know. So Les Wexner, he owns limited brands, L brands. So Victoria's Secret he owns, Abercrombie and Fitch, a lot of the places that you see when you go into the mall. I don't think it's the case anymore, but for a long time he was the largest clothing manufacturer and distributor in the United States. Billionaire, incredibly.
Was not wanted at my check.